Good evening, and welcome to The Unconventional Traveler. Tonight, we're going to the home of world-renowned field biologist and wildlife conservationist, Dr. George Schaller. For the past 50 years, George has been on a mission. He's devoted his entire life to saving the wildlife of Asia, Africa, and South America. George is the author of over a dozen books, including The Serengeti Lion and The Year of the Gorilla. George, welcome to our show.
Pleased to be with you.
George, you once said, roaming in remote places, deprived of cultures more, preferably alone, studying the habits of the little-known creature. This, to me, is the ultimate high.
Some people get their spiritual satisfaction in religion or in drugs or whatever. I get it being in beautiful scenery, in wilderness, in habitats that have not been degraded by people. And when I say I like to go alone, most work I can't do alone. I'm dependent on local people, whether it's porters or biologists, local biologists that work with me. So I'm often in very remote places, but usually, with rare exceptions, only local people. I seldom take Westerners out to work with me, although I monitor projects. I set up projects, I monitor them, and we often have to put an American or British person in there to run the project because there's no local person that can do it.
What led you to this kind of life?
I suspect most naturalists start as children in being intrigued about animals, full of curiosity about the natural world. And I was fortunate. As I grew up, I could have a hobby of watching animals like birds, keeping snakes in a terrarium, and so forth. And hey, jobs opened up, I could be paid for my hobby. My first field project was in 1952 in the Arctic slope of Alaska. So I was very fortunate to be a field assistant on an expedition to northeastern Alaska, the finest, greatest, most wonderful wilderness area left in the United States. As a result of this expedition, in 1960, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge was established. Here's our camp in the Shinjak River on the southern slopes of the Brooks Range. Expedition consisted of an ornithology professor, Bryna Kessel, another graduate student, and Marty Murray, the wife of the leader expedition, Olaus Murray. Olaus is dead. Marty Murray will celebrate her 100th birthday this year. She's sort of the Earth Mother of the conservation movement in this country and tremendously respected for her effort. The greatest present they could give her for the 100th birthday is for the Senate to vote down bill to drill in the area.
Why do you feel this is so important?
I thought when something was established in the United States, a wildlife refuge, it would be safe. Ever since the late 60s, there's been a tremendous conservation battle by the oil companies, the senators and congressmen from Alaska, various presidents, particularly the two Bushes. They all want to go into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to drill for oil. I find this tremendously sad that America has such a narrow vision that it only can see the economic potential of an area and would be willing to destroy its greatest wilderness for a few hundred days' supply of oil. For most of my professional life, I've been employed by the Wildlife Conservation Society in New York, which used to be called the New York Zoological Society. It was established in 1895. Since its inception, since its beginning, it has had as a goal to help protect animals in their environment. The first expedition the Society had was to Alaska in 1897, and it's continued ever since. And at present it has projects in about 50 countries, with most scientists being nationals within their own country. For some species and areas, I think you can have an honest hope. For a lot of areas, if you turn your back on it, it will be gone forever. On this little island of habitat, you've got this spectacular animal, one of our closest kin, the mountain gorilla. My wife Kay and I went there in 1959, when these were still Belgian colonies, to study the mountain gorilla. It has been seriously threatened for decades because the human population around the border is so dense that the dividing line between the reserve and the fields is absolutely sharp. However, the Rwandan government, in spite of civil war, political turmoil, has so protected the gorillas that in recent decades, they've been doing well. There is an active guard force that patrols the forest against poachers and invaders from the Congo side of the border. The Wildlife Conservation Society had two researchers, Amy Vedder and Bill Weber, there to habituate the gorillas to tourists. As a result, the local people, the government, they see the gorillas as giving the country an identity, and they have been protected. The gorillas are increasing, and I think Rwanda should be very proud in how it has protected these animals. But it also shows that you can never turn your back on a species. If you turn your back, they will be very quickly gone forever. And to be this near to one of our kin, to look into their beautiful brown eyes, is one of the greatest experiences in nature.
So I guess I get this sense that you feel you're on a real mission.
Yeah, you're an ecological missionary. These are vanishing so rapidly that now there's worldwide concern. 100 years ago there was concern, but not so much, and it wasn't as imminent that so many species would go extinct. So there's a tremendous urgency. Everybody in our field feels that we must save as much as possible for future generations now, while you still have options. Take a look at the wildebeest herds in the Serengeti. This is a Pleistocene vision of immense herds. There are about 1.3 million wildebeest in the Serengeti. It's the largest, most spectacular wildlife spectacle in the world. So you have well over 2 million animals migrating back and forth with the dry seasons in the green grass in the Serengeti. I went there to study the predators, to answer a very simple question. But the answer is not so simple. It's what effect do the predators have on the prey populations? Daily we went out to look for the lions. I knew all the individuals in several prides just by natural markings. I noted down what they killed, what age and sex of the species they killed, to get a general overview of what the ecology is in the area. This is the African wild dog. One female can have 13 pups. So packs increase very rapidly, then disease like rabies hits them, population crashes. They're very threatened now all over Africa. I pick certain animals to study to gain knowledge about them. I use this knowledge to work with governments to help conservation. There are many ways to approach this. Sometimes it's setting up reserves, sometimes it's working with local people so they don't kill them carelessly and needlessly. There are many approaches to conservation, but the end goal of every project is to help protect the environment for the country and the local people so they have a good quality of life in the future. My wife Kay loves coming into the field, so we lived in the Serengeti for over 3 years with our 2 small boys. I usually don't keep pets, but this poor lion cub was starving and cold and almost dead, and I took it home and we kept it for several months, and he became a very demanding and treasured part of the family. My wife Kay taught the boys school for the first few years of their life, which gave them a wonderful beginning, and at present they're both professors in universities.
George, when you're in the field, how many months will you usually be in any one given place?
Well, it varies. We were in India for 2 years, where I did the first study of tigers back in the early 60s. Well, one of the greatest experiences, one of the most beautiful animals in the world, is to see a tiger striding on velvet paws through the golden grass. Here you see the axis of cheetal deer, very alert. They're seeing a tiger in the distance walking by, so they're keeping a close eye on it. One of the species in central India that I studied and was also preyed on by tigers was the swamp deer. Very handsome deer, very scarce now in India.
I believe you said that you're not in radio or telephone contact at all when you're in the field?
I prefer to escape my cultural connections for a bit and just study the wildlife, depend on myself as much as possible. I moved the family in the 70s to Pakistan and worked in the northern mountains, the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush, to study snow leopards as well as the various wild sheep and goats. Spectacular country. Here we're crossing a glacier with our yak caravan in the Hindu Kush mountains up near the Afghanistan border. And another remote area where I did a little bit of work on snow leopards as well as blue sheep is in the northern Nepal in the Himalayas in a place called Dolpo, one of the most and truly Tibetan areas, undisturbed Tibetan areas left. On the promontory there you see a small monastery called She Gompa. We stayed a month there studying the sheep and the snow leopard that came through. I was there with writer Peter Matheson.
And then Peter Matheson went on to write one of the great travelogue books of all time, The Snow Leopard.
It's a wonderful book. And here is a picture of the elusive snow leopard. See, they're patterned in black and gray, which means if they're sitting still on a rock or in snow, they just seem to vanish. And they're very scarce. There may be, 5,000 left in the world, scattered over a tremendous mountain area of Central Asia. They're getting poached for their skins, and the bones are used for medicinal purposes in China.
Are you optimistic about their survival?
Yes, I think they have a better chance because often they're in very remote areas where there are few or no people.
Do you feel that conservation transcends politics?
Conservation most definitely transcends politics, and that I, as an American, have no problem working with countries that the US government usually denigrates or berates. We do projects in Myanmar, formerly called Burma. At present, I have projects in Iran. They're tremendously hospitable and cooperative in wanting to work with us. You work with them, work with the local people. It's friendly, congenial, cooperative. I can't say enough good about it. The fascinating area is in Laos, on the Vietnam-Laos border in a mountain range called the Annamites. Because of war and revolution, has seen no biologists for about 50 years. We did wildlife surveys on behalf of the Laotian government. Inadvertently, we found that this is really a lost world. The rainforest on top of the mountains has been isolated since the last ice age, about 18,000 years. All sorts of species have evolved there that occur nowhere else and were unknown to science. Here's a small barking deer. They're called barking deer because they bark like a dog when they get excited. But here's a small little animal weighing only about 15, 20 pounds at most, which was unknown to science, which occurs there in the Annamites. And here's another species of barking deer. That's a lot heavier. It weighs up to 50, 60 pounds. Again, completely unknown to science until the early 90s. I think it's wonderful that you can still, in this day and age, when people think so much is known, you can still find new species of large mammals. Of course, if you look for small creatures, there's endless amount to be discovered. In fact, so most species around us we don't even have a name for. Now, isn't this a spectacular animal? Look at these long horns. It weighs over 200 pounds. It's called locally saola. This animal was completely unknown until the early 90s. We were fortunate in 1980 to be able to work with Chinese scientists on the giant panda. Our purpose was to discover what is the life of the panda really like? How far does it travel? How often does it give birth? How much and what precisely does it eat? We put radios on some animals because they're very difficult to track in these dense bamboo forests. Then we found out the size of their home ranges, which can be anywhere from 2 or 3 square miles to 10 square miles or more. One serious problem was poaching. Either inadvertently animals were caught in snares set for musk deer, or they were shot to sell the pelts. And populations have been kept low because of the poaching and habitat destruction, but conditions have in recent years improved. Of course, protecting the panda means you protect all thousands of other species of plants and animals, including the rare golden monkey, which only occurs in those mountains in the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. In the late 70s, I did a study of wildlife in the big swamps of the Mato Grosso in Brazil. One of the animals I studied was a Paraguayan caiman. It's a small species of alligators. We studied their movements, their growth rates. We studied their nests to see what destroys them. And so we got basic information on these caimans, which were also used in the skin trade for making shoes and purses. We studied the world's largest rodent, the capybara. It's really an overgrown mouse, weighing up to 125 pounds. And it's a favorite food of another species we studied, which is the jaguar. They live on everything. They eat everything from turtles to these alligators to various capybara, deer. They have a very eclectic diet. We captured some jaguars by driving up trees with dogs and then putting a radio on them so we could follow them to see the size of their range. One of the principal problems they of course have is hunting, but Brazil has now set up some large reserves. In addition, there are some large private ranches where they are protected. But all in all, very little is still known about the species in Brazil. In late '89, we started a project trying to help the Mongolian government. That included the Gobi bear, the wild asses in Mongolia, wild camels. We put radios on the Gobi bears, which live in absolute desert. They eat the roots of a wild rhubarb mostly. And there are only about 30 left. We studied snow leopards, which the government wanted us to study, get an idea of how many there are. Maybe there's still 1,000 left in the country, more than any other country except for China. One of the big wildlife spectacles in Mongolia that nobody's heard about is the Mongolian gazelle. You can still go and see herds of 25,000 gazelles. The eastern steppes are grassland, not yet degraded, the last great grassland in the world. And as always, we deal with local people to find out what they think, what they suggest, how can they protect the wildlife. Now, I've had a long-term project in Tibet and work with the Tibet Forestry Department to help establish reserve, to census wildlife, to find out what must be done. One of the most wonderful areas in the world is the Changtang, which means northern plain in Tibet. Wide open spaces, most of it between 15 and 17,000 feet, which means even in summer it snows.
George, your hard work and perseverance has led to the creation of parks and preserves on 4 continents. Why is this one so important?
The one in Tibet is about 120,000 square miles. Then we're working in neighboring provinces, so we have the whole ecosystem protected. So far, over 200,000 square miles, which is an area almost as large as Texas, with very few people in it. But work there is difficult. We may spend 2 days trying to dig out our truck. Here, wild yak, there are only about 15,000 left, all on the Tibetan plateau. It's a species that is vanishing rapidly because there's a lot of meat on the hoof. If you bring them near domestic yak, they hybridize. So they need isolation. They need freedom from intrusion by people. A lovely species up there is the kiang, or Tibetan wild ass. They still occur in large herds in places because most Tibetans don't eat their meat. Some of the areas are so remote that the wildlife isn't even afraid. Here's a lynx. He let me walk right up to him. I don't think he'd ever seen a human before. We not only study the wildlife, but we also study the vegetation. Here's my wife, Kay, clipping the vegetation to find out how many species and what is the weight, the biomass of the species for each square meter. Here's a Tibetan antelope, which used to occur in huge herds. Early British explorers in the area talked of herds of 20,000 or more. They're now at best a few hundred. Since the late 80s, there's been a tremendous slaughter of these animals because they have the finest wool in the world. The local people and outsiders, motorized with automatic weapons, come in and they kill Tibetan antelope, they skin them, then the wool is smuggled to Kashmir in India, where it is woven into scarves which are sold internationally under the name of chartouche. China is trying to reduce the amount of poaching. The international customs are trying to catch poachers and so forth, but it's difficult because it's like the drug trade. A scarf of this Tibetan antelope wool, chartouche, sells for as much as $15,000 each. Sometimes the wool is paid for in tiger bones, which are then smuggled to China to be used in traditional medicines. So it's a two-way market in endangered species. However, there's a lot of space up in the Changtang. In about 120,000 square miles, there are only about 25,000 nomads with their herds of domestic yak and sheep and goats. Certainly, the people and the wildlife can live in harmony in that area.
Will you be going back there again soon?
I've been concentrating for the past few years in southeastern Tibet on the forests there because it has been more urgent. But look at this herd of wild asses flowing across the steppe at high altitudes. It's a kind of vision, I think, that we fight to keep, and also that China wants to keep as part of its natural heritage. And here's the kind of vision one takes away from the Changtang. In the foreground, like ants on a hillside, a big herd of antelope, turquoise lakes, snow-covered mountains. A view like this is an icon of that region.
George, what is your outlook about the future of our planet?
That's not an easy question to answer. Obviously, the destruction is accelerating not only because of population growth, but consumption is increasing even faster. What with globalization and other countries aspiring to a lifestyle that they see in the United States. Well, there are not enough resources for everybody to have this lifestyle. And most countries that want to make money quickly use natural resources such as cutting down their forests. So the destruction will continue. There are still options in that there are still areas that you can manage sustainably if there's the willpower, which means also the political will, if people get educated not to waste. Every act you have is an ecological act. Whether you drink a glass of water, if I go and flick on a light switch, everything we do has ecological implications. And we could reduce waste and consumption quite a bit. We could take better care of our land. There is a land ethic of not to waste and destroy. Now, if people would get into that kind of spirit, you could reduce the impact on the earth. But I think for a lot of countries, a lot of areas, the only hope they have really is to have large reserves or large areas that are managed and not just let go because it's politically expedient. And so, yes, the future is going to have much less diversity, and I think it's up to this generation for everybody to think on the impact on the environment. I'm sitting here in a big room, in a big house. The room is heated. Think of the resources that are really wasted doing it. I feel guilty. I know what I'm doing. And it's not easy to cut down. And other people in the world, billions of people, naturally want the same thing. I don't see where it's going. So all I can do is focus on specific aims and say, hey, I want to help the government protect this. I want to make people aware of that. But I don't go out to save the world.
Well, I think your overriding message is more than anything that people, we the ordinary citizens, should be thinking globally and acting locally.
Well, certainly everybody can contribute in some way. There are endless number of small conservation organizations in this country that have a local focus to save one forest, keep this river clean. And that is the one thing that's helping this country. Most other countries don't have that. They're beginning to have it, but in autocratic regimes, they're often not allowed to have NGOs that speak up on behalf of the environment. So there it helps when the Wildlife Conservation Society comes in and works with government officials to try to get some protection. So, well, everybody can help. Look, the Wildlife Conservation Society depends on mostly private funds to do its research. So if somebody wants to help Iran or what other country, they can also donate funds.
Now, how can people learn more about the Wildlife Conservation Society? Do they have a website?
There's a website, and they can write to the Wildlife Conservation Society in New York. The headquarters is at the Bronx Zoo.
Well, that's easy enough to find.
So they can go on the internet. It puts out a magazine called Wildlife Conservation, which is on some newsstands. And write to me or write to you to get more information. Be happy to provide it.
Well, George, I want to thank you for being my guest tonight. You're a great inspiration to all of us, and I wish you much continued success in the many trips and expeditions that lie ahead for you.
Well, thank you, Daryl, for your interest, and my same wishes to you. I hope your next trip will be marvelous.
Thank you. And thank you for watching another episode of The Unconventional Traveler, and I hope you'll join us again next Tuesday night at this very same time for another exciting adventure. Good night.